Good afternoon, Treasure Valley. My name is Rick and I work at FarWest Garden Center. I was asked to give a talk about the knowledge I have for trees in this valley. So just to start with, this is my third nursery that I've worked at in my career. I was actually able to start in the business well before the internet existed. So luckily I was able to look at books for all my knowledge, and that's where a lot of it comes from. The 3+ decades I've been in it, and this is a wonderful place to work. We have a very diverse collection of trees here, and the owners are outstanding to work with and work for. All right, so today's topic, I think what we're going to talk about is the 10 best trees for Boise. So best in what reference? Treasure Valley, all alkali. There's really no way to make it acidic. You can treat the soils to make them less alkali, but in my opinion, if I was going to put this tree in my yard, if I had room, which I don't, I would want to put in a tree that I wouldn't have to put a lot of iron on it in order to keep it healthy. Some of these trees will do well, say in Nampa and Caldwell. A lot of these trees that do well in Nampa and Caldwell should also do well, like say in the North End, where the soil might be a little richer. I think the first one on our list is going to be and these are specifically no order whatsoever. So we're going to start with copper curls and the ivory silk Japanese tree lilacs. To me, those are extremely nice trees. They bloom about May into June when there's really not a lot of things in bloom. One of the nice things about them is they do very well in alkali soil. Copper curls, Japanese tree lilacs are some of the nicest I have seen. They don't get huge, 20 feet tall, 20 feet wide. Not the fastest growing trees. A lot of people do like fast growing trees. In my opinion, a fast growing tree is really gonna either A, outgrow the spot, because trees don't stop growing, they slow down with age. Another reason is a slower tree, longer maturity, probably a little deeper root system to it. Not going to outgrow the spot. I'm not going to have to take it out in 10 years and try to fight the roots out of the ground and try to put something else in that I made a bad choice on. So ivory silk, copper curls, both very nice trees. Copper curls, the bark peels away in the winter, so you've got 4 seasons of interest on this tree. Don't get huge. A lot of times they can come in multi-stemmed, oftentimes single trunks. They don't colonize off the roots like common lilacs do, because they're actually varieties of Japanese and Peking lilacs. A nice tree, yellow fall color, maybe a little bit of a seed pod after the flower. You can go up there if you've got some time and cut the seed pods off, let the energy go into new leaves and new flower buds for the following year. Just an all-around nice tree. Another tree, if I had room in my yard, this is all make-believe because my yard is completely full. I've done tree number 2. Gosh, got 2 in my yard, regular species. I'm sure a lot of my friends out there are going to know exactly what I'm about ready to say, but we're going to call them the parodias. Gotta love a parodia. Shiny leaves in the spring, fun trunk movement, bark that changes color over time, glossy leaf, a little bit of a flower, kind of in the witch hazel family, kind of red little stamens. Hard to really see it unless you're up looking for it. But the cleanliness of the 2 trees that I have in my backyard that are Noah's Ark, one flanks this side of the yard, one flanks that side of the yard. I got lucky and got multi-stem varieties, which are really hard to find now, but trunked up, limbed up 4 or 5 feet. Nice planting below them in the shade, even though they're in the full sun. The fall color does kind of come late on them. I like the fact that it's a kaleidoscope of fall colors. Some years it's purple, some years they're orange. And in the 30+ years I've had them in my yard, I've never had a pest problem on them, which is amazing for trees in this valley. They, like I said, when they're young, they tend to hold their leaves late in the fall. Sometimes our freezes here in the valley kind of ruin the fall color on them. But if you're trying to screen a neighbor and you don't want to put in an evergreen, sometimes the protea would work for that, because of the fact that it does hold its leaves as it's young. It's kind of like the sound of wind blowing through corn in the winter, which is kind of fun. But my trees are mature now. I don't really have the problem with the leaves hanging on them anymore. So those are my favorites. There's one called Ruby Vase, kind of grows in a V pattern, which is very nice. I have the regular species, so mine are 30 feet tall, 15 feet wide. Like I said, I can't tell you how awesome and beautiful those branches are when they curve and twist, and just the fun trunk movement and the branch movement is something to look at through the winter as well. Another nice one that my sister has in her yard is Vanessa Perodia. It takes on the shape of a columnar hornbeam. It's 8 feet wide, dense, straight up in the air, a nice vertical accent for some of these smaller yards of today. I have seen these trees at the nursery I worked at in Nampa do very well. I have seen them in the north end do extremely well. I live up off the bench and they do very well up there. What can I say about maples? Most questions asked when people come into the nursery is what color do they want in the fall, and they want red. But when they come and talk to me, I'm going to ask them more questions up front. Most red maples, Acer rubrums, appreciate lower alkalinity soils. So if somebody's in Napa and Caldwell and they want a Sun Valley maple or they want a autumn blaze, I'm going to find out what part of town they live in and probably let them know that you're probably going to have to put a lot of iron on some of those red maple varieties in order to keep them lush, dark green. North end, probably no problem. Absolutely. Better soils down there. Out where I'm at, there's alkali soil, pretty heavy. My next door neighbor's got a red maple in his yard and it's a little off colored. I've suggested for years that he change it, but he seems to like it, so I'm just going to let it ride. So, red maples. We can talk all day about maples. We will talk about, firstly, if you want to have a red maple and you want the smaller leaf variety, there is one called Red Point. It has been tested in Oregon to do a fairly good job in taking the higher alkalinity soils. Another one that is called Sun Valley and another one called Autumn Flame, that those both latter varieties are seedless varieties. Nobody seems to like the Samaras that come down on them. Sun Valley probably would not do very well in Canyon County. The alkalinity out there is pretty severe in a lot of cases. Red Point might be okay, but if you're kind of not sure of the alkalinity, and the way to look, I tell people, is if you walk around the neighborhood and you see trees in your yard or in neighbor's yard that in the summer the leaves are off colored, where the vein of the leaf is green and the rest of the leaf is yellow, that's usually an indication of alkalinity issues. There are ways to treat it, of course. Why would I want to spend that much time putting iron into a tree when I could pick a tree that would probably thrive in an alkali situation? And there actually are a couple of maples that some of the nurseries that we start to buy from have actually introduced. They're a cross between two varieties of maples, a Shantung crossed with the Norway, and they've come up with some pretty clever names. One of them is Ruby Sunset. One of the gals that works here, it's her favorite tree. It gets about 25 feet tall, 20 feet wide. It does very well in alkali. Very glossy leaf to it. So to me, glossy leaves like a newly washed car. My truck's pretty dirty. I would rather have a glossy leaf tree in my yard, kind of like the Perodia leaves. They're very glossy. So Ruby Sunset is definitely one I think that's going to do very well for the Canyon County, the higher alkali, the Kuna area. It would still do very well down in the north end. Urban Sunset, a little bit taller by about 10 feet. $35 by $20, but like I say, the fact that they're glossy leaf, they're not going to get a lot of that scorch in the heat of summer on the leaf from the hot summer that we just went through. So the fall color on both those varieties, bright red. There you go, there's your red. Red Point, red in the fall. Sun Valley, seedless, red in the fall. Autumn Flame, seedless, red in the fall. Ruby Sunset, red in the fall. Urban Sunset, red in the fall. There's your red. There's your maples that would take all of the Canyon counties, the Ada counties. You can not have the iron issues on some varieties. Good win-wins. Another really fun maple, the Trident maple. Don't see a lot of these. I've seen these around for 20 plus years, a couple here and there. Every once in a while, somebody will bring one into the nursery. It's a very unique leaf. It's pretty easy to identify. It's like 3 lobes. We had a couple in the nursery this year. They were stunning. They were about 20 feet tall, 20 feet wide at maturity. It's hard to find a good image on the internet. And that's one thing I want to talk about later is the internet, how incorrect a lot of the information on the internet is. As I searched yesterday for photos for this class, and I've done this over 30 years. So a lot of the photos I was looking at yesterday, I was like, wrong, wrong, wrong. There was, as an example, there was a tricolor beech that was listed as a Ruby Falls Weeping Redbud. So the information, I'm a tree guy and got the sweater to prove it. We'll put some links on where you can go to get actual true information about trees. I use the Missouri Botanical Garden for a lot of my research. I use a lot of botanical garden sites. I figured they're probably going to have the most accurate information. I don't use my phone for a lot of stuff. One of the best tools I've ever learned about was the Michael Dirr, which, as you can tell, this book's pretty well used. But this is where I got all my knowledge from when I was younger. This one here has got enough duct tape on it to last a few more decades, but vital information. Then there's a new one that came out, the tree book. That one right there. Merry Christmas. Perfect. Good books right there. I'm not saying you have to buy these books, but this is where all of my experience and knowledge comes from, is these right here. Anytime there's some new tree in a nursery catalog, I'm looking it up, a couple of different sources to make sure that it's going to be hardy and durable for this valley, because there's no reason to bring a tree in here if it's not going to be hardy and durable. We just want to make sure that you're successful, because if you're not successful, we're not successful. All right, maples, we tapped them all. Got to talk about paperbark maple, another beautiful tree. Oh, I love it. We sell 5 or 6 a year. I wish we could sell more. Peeling bark, beautiful stature, very small amount of seeds. None of them are really viable, so you don't really get the little starts in the ground below the tree. I've seen them in full sun. There's some beautiful ones up. H Street area in a few yards. There's some down by where I live. Got one in my backyard for sure. That is definitely a collector's piece. That's probably one that would probably do a little bit better in, say, the lower lying areas, the north end. I don't know that a paperbark, unless you really love to garden, would do that well in Canyon County. But one of the models that I learned years ago was never say never. Never say never. Because I used to say, no, 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 that won't work. Then I had to eat crow. And I've eaten enough crow. So, and I'm always the one that'll, if I'm wrong about something, I'll correct myself for sure. There's no reason to. And I'm honest with crab apples. A lot of people love them when they're in bloom. They come in, they grab them. A lot of times they don't realize they have fruit on them. They don't realize that they can sucker off the root systems. They realize later, oh my gosh, all these suckers, how can I control these suckers? Not the easiest thing to control. I grew up with one in my front yard, to the fact where I won't even walk in my own yard now, even though I don't have a crab, with bare feet because of all the ow, 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 ow. And had to pick all the crab apples up before we could mow the yard, and they were stained on the sidewalks. However, with that being said, they have introduced quite a few new varieties of crab apples over the years that have what they call persistent fruit. So the fruit will stay on the tree and shrivel up for the most part and drop in the spring, or the birds will come out and the robins will illuminate the fruit within a few days on a tree. And the colonization in the suckers, a couple of our growers have actually had what they call right root on the understock of the tree. So you don't get near the colonization and the suckers coming up off the roots like you do on some of those older trees from when I was born, which we won't go there. But beautiful crabs tend to do pretty good in alkali. Not really high alkali, but beautifully fragrant, nice colors. All right, that's crab apples. We have a lot of varieties here. They're not all right root, but we do have a lot of varieties. So if you're interested in right root or sprout free, one of my go-to cherries, ornamental cherries, has always been the Kwanzan cherry. It's double pink flowers. There's no real fragrance to it. Moderate growing. It doesn't like low spots. So if you've got a low spot where several yards come together. I would definitely not put a cherry in that. I would not put a redbud in that. Probably wouldn't do anything like a ginkgo in that. Most trees don't tolerate standing water, but Kwanzan cherry, nice one, moderate growing, great fall color, seedless, kind of grows in the shape of a V pattern. You're probably in that 30 foot by 20 foot across the top part of the tree on the maturity, on the height. Zone 5, we are zone 6 here in the valley. So really the zones, what that means is that's once the tree is fully established, a zone 6 should be able to tolerate 10 below without any issues. Zone 5, they go in 10-degree increments. Zone 5, 20 below, 10 below. Zone 4, 30 below, 20 below. Has nothing to do with watering the zones on that. It has nothing to do with abuse. It has nothing to do with the wrong tree in the wrong spot. All the zones tell you is the amount of cold temperatures that tree can take once it's fully established and well rooted in the ground. So zone 4 tree going in today is probably to get established in the ground before it really truly becomes a zone 4 tree. So keep that in mind when you're looking at the zones. So zone 7, annual. Zone 8, tropical. Not gonna winter here, no way, houseplants. So that's how the zones work. So Kwanzan cherry, nice tree. Now they've introduced a kind of side cousin of the Kwanzan called pink flare. Zone 3B. So we talked about the zones. 3B, that is a cold hardy tree. A little bit narrower, about 5 feet less in height, but skinny when young and kind of bends out a little bit as it gets older. Single pink flowers in clusters. I've asked the growers if they have any fruit on it. They have several planted at the nursery. They haven't seen any fruit. Not saying it won't, but it would be so small if it ever had fruit that you probably wouldn't even notice it. Right root crabs, like I said, the understock, something huge, something to keep in mind if you don't want the colonization coming up everywhere in your yard. So they've done some good research on those over the years. Right root crabs, pink flare, flowering cherry, Kwanzan, popular trees, all good fall color. All nothing really overly huge at all. A lot of the yards today are getting a whole lot smaller for number one. I've noticed that a lot. People want a tree in a really low wet spot. We have got the trees for you. These are going to be pretty good size, a little bit taller than everything else we've looked at. So there are the deciduous conifers of the Don Redwood and the bald cypress. I was waiting for that moment. Bald cypress, Don Redwood, deciduous conifers, cone bearing, but yet drop their leaves in the fall. The biggest bald cypresses I've seen with their roots growing below water is Morrison Park. If you ever go down there and feed the ducks that you can't feed anymore, you'll notice those trees have that real soft lime green foliage, and then in the fall they turn kind of russet color. And if the roots are below water, you'll actually have these wooden knees that come up out of the ground that support and actually provide oxygen for the roots that are below the water. I'm not saying you would get that in your yard, but my parents have a Don Redwood in their front yard. They're up off Camas, and it is a beautiful tree other than the fact that it's by the power lines and the power company has destroyed the shape of the tree. But the rich red buttress trunk on it is beautiful. That being said, these are big boy trees. Don Redwood, pyramidal, 45, 50, 60 feet tall, 20 foot wide, unless there's power lines in the way that ruin the shape. Like I said, deciduous conifer, gonna develop round little cones. Leaves do drop off in the fall. A lot of times people see the trees and assume that they're evergreen, which they're not. Bald cypress, similar look, a little broader, same thing, deciduous conifer, round little cones, about the size of miniature cabbage, same kind of fall color, same kind of needle drop, but trees for wet soil, something to keep in mind. If I had room in my yard, definitely would put a bald cypress, Don Redwood in. Let's talk the skinny trees. Small footprint, vertical gardening. So many yards today, like I said, very small, but you still need a couple trees in your front yard. You don't want to put something in that in 10 years you're gonna have to take out. We've got the Parkland pillar birch. We're talking 6-8 feet wide, 30 feet tall. It'll have the nice white bark on it. Takes drought, takes heat. Once established, then a Streetscapes oak. Spire differs from Crimson Spire for the fact that Streetscapes, as it goes rusty red in the fall, will actually drop its leaves. The Crimson Spire will actually hold its leaves in the winter, kind of like when I talked about earlier about the Parodias, which if you're trying to hide somebody, great. The leaves will drop off in the spring. You're out there cleaning up your yard from winter debris anyway. The leaves would be dropping off. At some point you could clean those up. But like I say, if you get Streetscapes, those leaves should typically, if we have decent falls around here, which this last year was beautiful, the leaves would drop off in the fall. And then you could just do your cleaning. Yeah, you're gonna get acorns, which is probably gonna introduce squirrels. Another skinny maple, which we're gonna jump back to the maples because everybody loves maples, is the Armstrong maple. It's 45 feet tall, 15 feet wide at maturity, listed as relatively fast growing. One that, then again, probably wouldn't do very well. Canyon County, higher alkali, better suited for the east end, the north end, up on the benches, not a problem there. Skinny, like I said, the 45 by 15, you're looking at really probably close to 35, 40 years really before a lot of these get to that height. So when you see these heights, that's really, we're planting these trees for the future. A lot of the parks that I'd love to go down and photograph, those trees are so beautiful and probably planted, who knows when those parks were developed, but to go down there and just see the beauty of those tall trees and sit in the shade and capture the shadows and the reflections and whatnot is pretty amazing. So I wouldn't be too worried about some of the heights of these trees. Now, if you've got a real teeny tiny one-story house, but the last thing you want to do is be popping a 60-foot tree in the front yard. That's where a lot of these other ones that we mentioned today, the copper curls, kind of the ruby sunsets, they're not really going to dwarf a one-story house. That'd be a tree for a front yard. That shouldn't be a problem. You got a two-story house, you could easily get away with the Dawn redwoods, the bald cypresses. We didn't talk tulip trees. Tulip trees, there's one planted out front of the nursery. That's a good-looking tree. Moderate growing. Takes a few years to develop the flowers. The flowers kind of have an orange base to them and look like a tulip. Yellow fall color, not a bad tree. Pretty good size though, 60 foot. They do make a clumber in that. Sugar maples, another maple. Flash fire, one that they've developed that actually turns red in the fall. Nice trees, zone 4s. 45 by 40. Never seen really any sugar maples with alkali issues or needing iron on them. It's amazing. And some of the older varieties would turn orange in the fall, but they've started to develop quite a few that A, grow faster, can do well in heat, can do well in cold, and also have red. We're back to the red fall color. A lot of people like red fall color. I am one of those as well. June snow, called a giant dogwood. It's Cornus controversa or Cornus alternifolia. It's got a flower like the shrub form. It's the white fuzzy little stamens on there. But the beauty of this tree is the very strong horizontal branch pattern that it puts out. I've seen a shrub form in front of an Applebee's in a really hot parking lot over off of Emerald going, what in the heck? And I've seen them in full sun in friends' yard in the tree form. So it takes a few years to get that horizontal branch pattern. But if you want a tree that's going to be wider than tall, and has beautiful fall coloring, and has that extremely strong horizontal branch pattern to it, June snow, giant dogwood. Like I said, not a Florida dogwood, so it's not going to have the flowers like you would see on Cherokee Brave or Cherokee Chief or anything like that, but the shape of the tree is definitely something I would definitely put in my yard. That is really what I'm going to wrap up with. So, what did we learn here today from this little talk? We learned zones. We learned alkalinity in the soil. We learned that this is a good list. However, there's probably a lot more trees that I didn't put on this list that would easily work here. So when we come into the nurseries and we want a tree for a certain area, I think the best thing to do is try to tell the person that's working there where you live, or at least the vicinity. Hey, I'm out in Canyon County. The soil's really high alkali. I've got issues with this. This is what I need. How can you help? And that's really what we are about here at FarWest. So this is number 1 of 2 more classes. The second class next week will be one of my favorite subjects, and that would be Japanese maples. And then the following after that would be conifers. So we will do our very best to get you some more ideas for those areas.